The massive ship drifted silently through the darkness of space, its black hull absorbing all light that touched it. Inside the observation chamber, Supreme Eraser Kethval stood before a glowing display that showed a small blue planet, spinning peacefully around its yellow star. "Show me their records," Kethval said to his assistant. The hologram changed, displaying images of the planet's inhabitants. They were bipedal creatures with soft skin and no natural weapons. They built cities of metal and stone, traveled in primitive vehicles, and seemed to spend most of their time fighting each other over resources and beliefs. "They call themselves humans," the assistant reported. "Population, 8 billion. Technology level, barely beyond chemical rockets. They have discovered nuclear fission, but have not yet mastered clean energy. Their planet shows signs of environmental damage from their industrial activities." Kethval nodded slowly. The assessment was routine. For 3 million years, his people had traveled the galaxy performing this same duty. They were the Vorthok Collective, the self-appointed caretakers of the universe. When they found a species that showed promise, they left it alone to grow and develop. When they found a species that was destructive or had no potential, they removed it. But the Vorthok did not simply destroy worlds. Destruction left debris, radiation, evidence of what had been. The Vorthok erased things completely. Their quantum unraveling technology could target the very foundation of reality that held a planet together and simply delete it from existence. When they were finished, it was as if the planet had never existed at all. No one remembered it because there was nothing to remember. "Their warfare is constant," the assistant continued. "In the past century alone, they have engaged in 2 global conflicts that killed millions. They possess weapons capable of ending all life on their world, yet they continue to build more. They poison their own air and water while knowing it will harm future generations." Kethval had seen this pattern many times before. Species would develop technology faster than wisdom, then destroy itself or its environment. It was better to end their existence cleanly than to let them suffer through a slow collapse or spread their destructive nature to other worlds. "The decision is clear," Kethval announced. "Initiate erasure protocol." Around him, his crew began the familiar ritual. 7 massive ships arranged themselves in a precise formation around Earth's solar system. Each ship was larger than Earth's moon and carried quantum engines capable of unraveling the basic particles that held matter together. The process usually took only a few hours. Kethval remembered the last world they had erased. It had been a planet called Maratus, inhabited by a warrior species that had turned their entire world into a battlefield. Before that, there had been Veltar, whose people had built beautiful crystal cities but had enslaved other species to do so. And before that, Lumina Prime, covered in singing forests whose inhabitants had developed biotechnology that was slowly consuming other worlds like a virus. All of them were gone now, as if they had never existed. The universe was cleaner, safer, more peaceful because of the Vorthok's work. The quantum engines began to charge with a low humming sound that vibrated through the ship's hull. Energy readings climbed steadily as the reality unraveling process prepared to begin. The other 6 ships reported ready status. "Target confirmed," the weapons officer announced. "Planet designated Earth, Sol System, Outer Spiral Arm. All systems prepared for quantum erasure." Kethval raised his hand to give the final command when something unusual appeared on the sensors. The scanning officer leaned forward, studying the readings with confusion. "Supreme Eraser," the officer called out. "I am detecting something strange about this planet," explained Kethval ordered. "The consciousness readings are ... different. Most planets we have processed show a few million individual life signatures at most. This planet is showing 8 billion distinct consciousness patterns, each one with unusual quantum density." Kethval frowned. In all his years of service, he had never encountered anything like this. Most species had relatively simple consciousness patterns that barely registered on their quantum sensors. But the readings from Earth showed something unprecedented. "What does this mean?" he asked. "Unknown, Supreme Eraser. But each individual consciousness appears to be somehow anchored to reality in a way we have not seen before. Their life force. Readings are remarkably ... stubborn. Kethvel stared at the display. The human consciousness patterns pulsed with an odd intensity, as if each individual mind was actively insisting on its own existence. It was curious, but not enough to change the decision. Proceed with erasure, he commanded. The quantum engines reached full power. Reality-unraveling beams lanced out from all 7 ships, converging on the small blue world. The process that had successfully erased hundreds of civilizations began its work on Earth. But something went wrong. The beams struck Earth's quantum signature and encountered resistance. Not the simple resistance of matter or energy, but something far more fundamental. It was as if the planet itself was refusing to be erased, fighting back against non-existence with a will that defied all logic. Status report, Kethvel demanded. The erasure field is holding, but progress is much slower than expected. Should have deleted 30% of the planet's quantum signature by now, but we have only managed 5%. Kethvel stared at the readings in disbelief. In 3 million years of erasure operations, nothing like this had ever happened. The humans, without even knowing they were under attack, were somehow resisting complete annihilation through sheer force of will. The erasure process continued. But Earth endured. Dr. Giwan Park was working late in her laboratory in Seoul, studying equations about how the smallest particles in the universe behave. She had been working for 12 hours straight, and her eyes were tired. She reached for her coffee mug to take a sip when something impossible happened. The mug flickered. One moment it was solid and real in her hand. The next moment she could see through it like it was made of glass. Then it became solid again. She rubbed her eyes hard, thinking she was seeing things because she was so tired. But the flickering happened again. This time her entire desk seemed to fade away for a split second before snapping back to normal. Guan stood up quickly, her heart beating fast. Something was very wrong. Across the world, the same strange thing was happening everywhere at exactly the same time. In New York City, people on the street stopped and stared as the tall buildings around them began to shimmer like heat waves. The buildings looked solid one moment, then see-through the next, then solid again. In Tokyo, an entire city block vanished completely for 10 seconds. The people standing on the sidewalk found themselves looking at empty space where apartments and shops had been. Then, with a sound like ripping paper, the buildings popped back into existence as if nothing had happened. In London, something even stranger occurred. The Thames River, which had flowed in the same direction for thousands of years, suddenly began flowing backward and upward, defying gravity. The water climbed into the air like it was flowing up an invisible hill before crashing back down with a noise that sounded like the sky was being torn apart. High above Earth, in a military space station, Commander Yeho Kim was the first person to understand that these were not random events. He was monitoring space around Earth when his instruments detected something that should not exist. "What am I looking at?" he asked his team. Lieutenant Minji Lee, his communications officer, checked her screens with growing alarm. Detecting massive energy waves coming toward Earth, but they do not match any known technology. The energy patterns are unlike anything in our database. Commander Kim frowned as he studied the readings. The energy signatures were enormous, far beyond anything humans had ever created. But more troubling was what the energy was doing to space itself around Earth. "Sir," Lieutenant Lee called out, her voice shaking. "I am receiving reports from every military base on the planet. They are all reporting the same thing. Reality itself seems to be breaking down." Commander Kim realized with cold certainty that Earth was under attack by something beyond human understanding. In space, aboard the Ledvorthok ship, Supreme Eraser, Kethval was experiencing something he had never encountered in 3 million years of erasing worlds. His instruments showed that the erasure process, which should have taken only 4 hours, was failing. "Status report," he demanded. "Supreme Eraser, after 8 hours of continuous erasure, field operation. We've only managed to delete 30% of the planet's quantum signature. This is unprecedented. The planet should have been completely erased by now." Kethval studied the readings with growing fascination. The human consciousness patterns were not simply resisting erasure, they were actively fighting it. Every time a portion of Earth began to fade from existence, billions of human minds seemed to collectively refuse to let it disappear. Increase power to maximum, he ordered. The 7 Vorthok ships channeled all their energy into the erasure field. The wave of non-existence that struck Earth was stronger than anything they had ever used before. The effect was devastating, but still incomplete. The Pacific Ocean, the largest body of water on Earth, simply stopped existing for several minutes. Ships floating on its surface suddenly found themselves falling through empty space. Coastal cities watched in terror as a wall of nothingness stretched to the horizon where the ocean had been. Then, with a sound like thunder, trillions of gallons of water snapped back into existence, creating massive waves that crashed against every shore. Entire continents flickered in and out of reality. People in Australia watched the ground beneath. Their feet become transparent, showing the molten core of the earth below, before solidifying again. In Africa, the Sahara Desert briefly became a vast hole in the world before filling back in with sand. But despite all this destruction, Earth continued to exist. Underground, in bunkers that had been quickly converted into emergency research centers. Dr. Jiwon Park worked desperately to understand what was happening. She had connected instruments to volunteers to measure their brain activity during the reality fluctuations. What she discovered changed everything. The human brain produces measurable, quantum effects, she announced over the emergency global communication network that had been established. Every time reality tries to erase something around us, our minds automatically work to keep it real. We're not just watching reality, we are helping to create it. Her words spread rapidly across every communication channel on Earth. Scientists, military leaders, and ordinary people began to understand that they were not helpless victims. Their very consciousness was Earth's defense against erasure. Someone, somewhere, coined a phrase that became humanity's battle cry in the face of non-existence. I remember, therefore it is. As billions of humans began to consciously focus their thoughts on maintaining reality, the Vorthok erasure field encountered something it had never faced before. The combined will of an entire species that absolutely refused to stop existing. War for Earth's existence had begun. And humanity was fighting back with the only weapon they had, their stubborn insistence on continuing to be real. 3 months had passed since the attacks began, and Earth looked very different now. Most people lived underground in hastily built cities carved from rock and concrete. Above ground, the world changed constantly. Buildings, roads, and even mountains would fade away without warning, then snap back into existence, hours or days. Later, Dr. Jiwon Park had become one of the most important people on Earth. She now led something called the Global Reality Defense Initiative, a group of scientists from every country working together to save their world. She stood in a deep, underground bunker, speaking to world leaders through a special communication system that could not be erased. I have figured out how the attacks work, she said, pointing to charts and graphs on the wall. The attackers are changing the basic rules of reality itself. They make things that should exist become things that might not exist. But human minds have a special ability. When we see something and remember it, we make it real again. The world leaders listened carefully. They had seen their own countries flicker in and out of existence. They had watched their people disappear and reappear. Like ghosts, Captain Hyen Seo had once commanded ships in the Korean Navy. Now he commanded something much stranger. He stood in a room filled with machines that looked like giant metal flowers, with spinning parts and glowing centers. These are reality anchor machines, he explained to his team. We built them by studying how the attacks work, then doing the opposite. Instead of making things disappear, these machines help things stay real. The machines worked by connecting to human minds. Groups of people would sit around each machine and focus all their thoughts on keeping something real. The machine would take those thoughts and make them stronger, spreading them out to protect entire cities. We have successfully protected Seoul, Moscow, and Snow Palo, Captain Hyen Seo reported. The key is that people must truly believe. The stronger their belief that something should exist, the harder it becomes for the attackers to erase it. The enemy was learning too. Each day they tried new ways to attack. One morning, every library on Earth vanished. All the books, All the written knowledge of humanity simply stopped existing. But within hours, librarians and teachers around the world began reciting from memory every book they could remember. Slowly, the libraries returned. Another day, everyone on Earth forgot what the color blue looked like. The sky turned gray, the ocean became colorless, and people could not remember that blue had ever existed. But artists and children who loved to draw worked together to recreate blue from their deepest memories. They painted pictures and described the color until everyone remembered, and blue returned to the world. The most frightening attack came when mathematics itself disappeared. Suddenly, no one could count, add, or subtract. Engineers could not build. Computers stopped working, and even simple things like cooking became impossible. But mathematicians and teachers locked themselves in rooms and worked day and night to rebuild every equation from scratch, thinking through every number until math existed again. Sergeant Minho Kong was a soldier who had become a detective. He spent his days studying the strange energy patterns that appeared whenever something was erased. He worked with a team of scientists who had learned to track these patterns like following footprints. "The energy has a source," he announced at an emergency meeting. "Every time they attack us, they leave traces. I have followed these traces. Backward through space," he showed everyone a map of the solar system with 7 red dots positioned beyond the farthest planets. 7 massive ships, he continued. "They are hiding in folded space, but we can find them." This to us. Dr. Giwan Park studied the information with excitement and fear. For months, humanity had been defending itself.
Ow.
They had learned to survive the attacks and even reverse some of them. But they had never been able to strike back at their attackers. "If we can find them, we can reach them," she said slowly. "And if we can reach them, we can fight back." Captain Hyen Seo finished her sentence. The idea was almost too crazy to believe. Humanity would build spaceships using the same quantum technology that was being used to attack them. But these ships would work differently. Instead of being held together by metal and fuel, they would be held together by human stubbornness and belief. "We will weaponize memory itself," Dr. Juwan Park explained to the gathered team. "If our consciousness can keep things real, then we can build weapons that force things to become real whether the enemy wants them to or not." The project began immediately. In underground factories around the world, teams of engineers and scientists worked alongside groups of volunteers whose only job was to believe, as hard as they could, that the ships they were building would work. The ships looked strange, like they had been designed in a dream. They were built from materials that should not exist, powered by engines that ran on collective human will, and armed with weapons that fired concentrated memories at their targets. "The enemy has been erasing worlds for millions of years," Captain Hyen Seo said as he looked at humanity's first reality-powered warship. "But they have never faced a species that refuses to stop existing." The war was about to change. Humanity was no longer just defending their world. They were preparing to take the fight to those who had tried to erase them. The spaceship, RSS Indomitable, looked like it had been built by children using spare parts from a junkyard. Its hull was made from pieces of human metal welded together with alien technology that humanity had learned to copy. Wires and pipes ran along the outside in patterns that made no sense to normal engineering. But the ship flew because its crew believed it could fly. Their belief was strong enough to hold it together. Captain Hyen Seo stood on the bridge, looking out at the stars through a window that was held in place by pure human stubbornness. He had chosen every person on his crew carefully. They were not the best pilots or the smartest engineers. They were people who had one special quality. They absolutely refused to believe that anything could make them stop existing. Dr. Juwan Park worked at a control station that looked like a cross between a computer and a pipe organ. She had designed the ship's strangest weapon, something she called memory cannons. Instead of firing bullets or energy beams, these weapons fired concentrated human memories at their targets. "How do memory cannons work?" a young crew member had asked her during training. "Imagine every memory you have ever had," Dr. Jiwan Park had explained. "Now imagine shooting all those memories at someone else and forcing them to remember things they had forgotten or tried to ignore. That is what our weapons do. Navigator. Minji Lee sat at her station, tracking the enemy ships that were hiding in folded space beyond the solar system. Her instruments, which should not have been able to work, functioned because she believed they could find anything. Target confirmed, she announced. First enemy vessel at coordinates 27 mark. The human fleet consisted of 12 ships, each one more impossible than the last. They were built from human determination and alien technology, powered by collective belief, and crewed by people who had survived months of reality attacks. As they dropped out of stealth mode near the Vorthok fleet, they looked like a collection of flying scrap metal. But they were humanity's hope. Supreme Eraser Kethvel stared at his instruments in complete disbelief. For 3 million years, no species had ever fought back against the Vorthok. Most did not even know they were being attacked until they no longer existed. But these humans had not only resisted erasure, they had built spaceships and traveled through space to fight. "This is impossible," he said to his crew. "Their technology should not work. According to our analysis, their ships are held together by nothing more than their belief that they can fly." His science officer checked the readings again. Supreme Eraser. That appears to be exactly how their ships function. They have somehow weaponized their own consciousness. The first human memory cannon fired. It did not look like much, just a beam of soft blue light that reached across space to touch the lead Vorthok ship. But when the beam made contact, something extraordinary happened. The Vorthok ship's quantum computers, which had been empty of all records of erased civilizations, suddenly filled with data. Information about worlds that had been deleted from existence began flowing back into the ship's memory banks. The crew found themselves remembering civilizations they had helped erase thousands of years ago. Kethvel grabbed his head in pain as his mind filled with images he had never seen before. He saw a beautiful world with crystal cities and peaceful people. He remembered walking through their streets before giving the order to erase them. But he had never actually walked through those streets because the planet had been deleted before he could visit it. "What is happening to us?" he demanded, but his crew was experiencing the same thing. Memories of erased worlds filled their minds. They remembered the faces of billions of people they had never met. People whose entire existence they had wiped away. Dr. Juwon Park's voice came over the communication system, reaching every Vorthok ship. "For millions of years you have decided which civilizations deserve to exist. You have erased entire worlds and forgotten about them. Now you are going to remember every single one." The battle was unlike anything that had ever happened in space. The Vorthok ships fired their erasure weapons at the human fleet, trying to delete the ships from existence. But the human crews simply refused to believe they could be erased. Each ship was filled with people who had spent months learning to hold reality together with their minds. When an erasure beam hit the RSS Indomitable, parts of the ship began to fade away. But Captain Hyen, SEO, and his crew focused all their thoughts on keeping their ship real. The fading parts snapped back into existence, and the ship continued fighting. Meanwhile, the memory cannons continued their work. Each beam that struck a Vorthok ship forced it to remember more erased civilizations. The alien crews found themselves experiencing the memories of billions of victims. Feeling their fear and pain as they were deleted from existence, one by one, the Vorthok ships began to change. Their crews, overwhelmed by the memories of all the lives they had erased, started to question everything they believed. How could they have the right to decide which worlds should exist? What gave them the authority to erase entire civilizations? But the humans were not finished. They had a bigger plan, one that would change the balance of power in the universe forever. The human fleet followed the Vorthok ships into a place that should not exist. It was the space between spaces, the void between dimensions where the Vorthok had hidden their true home for 3 million years. Captain Hyen SEO guided his ship through a crack in reality that his crew created simply by believing it had to be there. "This is impossible," Navigator Minji Lee said as she watched her instruments track their path through nothingness. "We are flying through empty space that connects to other empty spaces. Nothing is impossible if you refuse to believe it is," Captain Hyen SEO replied calmly. The Vorthok home dimension appeared before them like a massive cathedral made of black crystal and dark energy. It was beautiful in a terrifying way. with towers that stretched infinitely upward, and halls that seemed to contain entire galaxies. This was where the Supreme Council of Erasers had met for millions of years to decide which worlds would live and which would die. Dr. Giwan Park stood at her control station, looking at the ultimate weapon humanity had built. It was called the Reality Restoration Engine, and it was the size of a small building. Instead of destroying things, it could force things that had been erased to exist again. "The weapon is ready," she announced to Captain Hyen SEO. Captain Hyen SEO opened a communication channel to the Vorthok Fortress. "Supreme Eraser Kethful. This is Captain Hyen SEO of Earth. We have come to end your reign of erasure." Kethval's voice came back, filled with anger and confusion. "You should not be here. This place is hidden beyond the reach of any physical beings. How did you find us?" Dr. Jiwon Park took over the communication. "We found you because we refused to believe you could hide forever. You have spent millions of years deciding which species deserve to exist. But you never asked the most important question. Who gave you that right?" The battle that followed was unlike anything that had ever happened in the history of the universe. The Vorthok unleashed their full power, trying not just to erase the human ships, but to delete them so completely that they would never have existed at all. Erasure beams that could delete entire galaxies struck the human fleet. But the humans had learned something during their months of fighting for survival. They had learned that consciousness was more powerful than any weapon. As the erasure beams hit their ships, the crews focused all their thoughts on one simple idea: we exist, and nothing can change that. The human ships flickered as parts of them were temporarily erased, but they snapped back into reality as their crews refused to accept non-existence. The fleet held together not because of advanced engineering, but because every person aboard absolutely believed they had the right to exist. Dr. Jiwon Park watched the battle from her station and made a decision that would change the universe forever. "Initiating Reality Restoration Protocol," she announced. The Reality Restoration Engine powered up with a sound like music played backwards. But instead of targeting the Vorthok themselves, it targeted something else: their ability to erase others. For 3 million years, the Vorthok had possessed technology that could delete anything from existence. Dr. Jiwon Park's weapon reached into the quantum foundation of that technology and changed it. Instead of a tool for erasure, it became a tool for restoration. The effect was immediate and universe-wide. On a world that had been empty space for 2,000 years, began to swirl and solidify. Trees that sang in mathematical harmonies grew from nothing. Cities made of living crystal formed from pure probability. The planet Lumina Prime, erased by the Vorthok millennia ago, began to exist again. Across the galaxy, the same thing happened. On hundreds of worlds, the warrior planet Maraudus rematerialized with its inhabitants in the middle of battles they had been fighting when they were erased. The crystal cities of Veltar reformed from equations written in starlight. The peaceful farming worlds of the Kepler sector bloomed back into existence with their people wondering why they felt like they had been asleep for a very long time. Civilizations that had been deleted from reality for millions of years suddenly existed again as if they had never been gone. Supreme Eraser Kethvel felt the change happen inside his own body and mind. The power that had defined his people for eons was still there, but it was different now. Instead of the ability to delete and forget, he and all his people now had the ability to remember and restore. "What have you done to us?" he whispered, his voice filled with shock. Captain Hyen SEO's response was broadcast to every Vorthok ship and to their home dimension. "We gave you the chance to become gardeners who plant instead of gardeners who only cut things down." The war was over. The Vorthok could no longer erase civilizations, but they had gained something else: the power to bring back everything they had destroyed. For the first time in 3 million years, they would have to face the consequences of their actions and work to repair the damage they had done. Humanity had saved not only their own world, but every world that had ever been erased. The universe was no longer at the mercy of those who decided what should exist. From now on, the power belonged to those who believed in the right of all things to exist. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. Sometimes the greatest strength comes not from the ability to destroy, but from the stubborn refusal to let anything be destroyed.